Welcome to the On-Premise IT Roundtable podcast, the only show that dares to be both on topic or on-premise and on location, on premises. Each time we meet, we pick a panel of IT influencers to discuss a single topic. This time around, we're talking about deskilling. We are here at AI Field Day, and one of the conversations that came up with this whole concept of whether machine learning and AI in general is going to take away from the skills of engineers and operators and drivers and everyday people, or whether it's going to let them focus higher in the stack. That's what we're going to talk about. But before we do, let's meet who's on the panel today.
My name is Ray Lucchesi. I'm with the president and founder of Silverton Consulting. We're an independent IT analyst firm located in Denver, Colorado.
David Kanter. I'm the executive director and founder of ML Commons, an organization that is trying to make machine learning better for everyone. Also an analyst. I run Real World Insights, which focuses on silicon, semiconductors, and other related things.
Peter Mackenzie. I'm both a director of a company called MQ Training and a company called Mackenzie in the UK, where we focus on Wi-Fi. As a technology. I'm also the president of the Wireless LAN Association.
So we have a diverse group of people here, but all of you share something in common, and that's that all of you know quite a lot about machine learning and how it has impacted various parts of enterprise technology. And Peter, I'm going to start with you to get this kicked off here. When you see ML ops and you see AI ops and you see, self-driving cars and all these other things, you might get a little scared and say, I think that's going to take skills away from people. I think that's going to take focus away from people. And maybe there's going to be nobody who actually knows this stuff anymore, right? I mean, if we create an automated Peter Mackenzie, who is going to fix the Wi-Fi?
Absolutely. I would have to agree with the premise, I think. I think one of my, a lot of people have said to me, particularly in my industry, one thing I do a lot of is troubleshooting, particularly protocol analysis, which is detailed analysis of packets. And I've had several companies tell me, machine learning companies tell me that basically they're putting me in a box, and that's what they're trying to create, so people don't need me. And well, I'm actually a big advocate of machine learning and AI. Before I sound negative, I want to say that, and I think it can do an awful lot. But what I'm also is a realist is that when we're talking about self-driving networks and self-driving problem identification, and to the point where the ultimate goal of AI ops, I think, is that we can actually self-drive networks or self-drive systems where they can fix themselves. The problem is, I think AI, however good it is, it's only ever going to get, 90% of the problems? Maybe you might get to 95% of the things it can detect. There's always going to be something new, which it's not learned, which it doesn't know about. And the problem with that, I see, is that you get there for people who are managing these systems, and because 95% of the time, they never need to troubleshoot anything. They've got a system that not only detects it, but potentially can fix it for them. They don't have any practice in troubleshooting, any practice in analysis. And then for that 5%, who fixes that? That's my premise. That I think is why it is deskilling engineers.
You fix it, Peter, obviously.
Well, obviously I fix it, and I'm happy for you to pay for me to do that for you.
To a large extent, the way that AI can play out and the way that it has played out to some extent is that, AI is there to do a couple of different things that are very well, easily automated, easily understood to some extent. And that brings your level of skills up a notch so that you don't have to look at, reams of logs on packets and stuff like that. You may have to only look at, 5% of the packets because the AI is there saying, hey, these look odd. I don't understand what's going on. So AI, to some extent, becomes an assistant to help you focus on what what the real problems are, rather than the mundane types of things. That's my view.
I see that, but again, with protocol analysis, a lot of people tell me, they go, I wish I could do what you could do. But when I look at a protocol trace, I just don't understand it. And I say, well, it's because you're not doing it regularly. Unless you're doing these skills regularly, You're never going to be able to do it once a year because you're just not going to have the skills needed. And I think that's the problem, is that if you take away 80% of the problems, people are just not going to be practiced at doing having that analysis skills.
I mean,
and in fact, I already see some of that today.
yeah.
In QA engineers.
So, I think one of the things you have to focus on is that AI is good at specific tasks,
it is.
right, as opposed to jobs, right? And so I think, society-wide, there's very much this concern of like, oh, are we going to be unemployed because of this? And there's actually a great example I saw on Reddit, and someone was saying, oh my gosh, there's someone who has a self-driving truck. Truck driver is the most common occupation in the United States. We're going to have 2 million people out of work. There's going to be riots. And there was someone I saw on Reddit who said, well, my uncle's a truck driver. These are the 19 things he does. Driving a truck is one. Filling it up with gas is another. Fixing flats is another. Paying bribes is another, et cetera. Like, there's all sorts of things you have to do. And so, I think there's tremendous potential to eliminate some tasks, right? And that may very well result in a de-skilling, but it's also true that, like, if you look at like cars, right? I think once upon a time, everyone who had a car, all 10 of them, right, knew how to fix the wheels. I don't know how to do that, and I do not want to know how to do that. However, I think it's great that there is the capability for people who really want to play with their cars to do that. And so, yeah, to a certain extent, like, some things will just pass out of our hands, but there will be more complicated and higher value problems to focus on.
I think that's true. I think that when you take cars, you take sat navigation systems.
Yeah.
They're a great example. There's people I know, younger than myself, who cannot drive their car without navigation on.
Yeah.
They don't know how to navigate street signs. They don't know how to read a map. And they've been,
you're from the UK, right?
They've been de-skilled in that sense. In fact, that they can't map read anymore. They literally cannot do it. So you take away that navigation system, and they physically can't. And I know people who have batteries died on phones like that, and they've literally had to stop, and because they couldn't drive anymore.
Yeah.
So I think it does do de-skill. Now, you may say that doesn't matter, because we've now got that technology, so we don't need that skill anymore. But
think about in the old days, manual calculators versus electronic calculators versus computers and things like that. Things are moving upscale. Do you need to know how to do long division and long multiplication anymore? Yeah, arguably, maybe not. I mean, to extent, because all that stuff is available.
No, I mean,
on your computer, on your calculator, on
but
your phone,
you need to know how to do
watch.
it. You need to know how to do it if you're going to tell the machine how to do it, right? So that's one issue.
I understand that, but that's not saying that everybody has to be educated in how to do long division. And don't get me wrong, I think they should be educated in learning how. But should they do it anymore? Is it really a valuable use of the educational time?
So I think when things can be done, so a calculator can 100% of the time calculate 2 + 2 and get to 4, 100% of the time. Therefore, I think you can say, well, actually, maybe we've lost the ability to do mental arithmetic, but we have a method which we know. But what my problem is, when you get complex IT systems, when you've got the people looking after it who don't understand how it works because a machine is managing it for them, and they don't have the skills, so then the times when it does go wrong, and the times when the AI can't answer the question, have they got the skills needed to manage it and fix it? And my worry is that they won't. And I think that's slightly different, because I think when something can 100% of the time guarantee do a skill, I think de-skilling can be okay.
Yeah, I mean, isn't it also a matter of degree of the de-skilling? And I mean, to me, part of the promise of AI is, and I'm going to reason by analogy here, is the new opportunities it creates. Like, I think about, social media influencer. Apparently, that is in fact an occupation, right? If you're Beyonce, you probably employ someone to tend to your Twitter, to tend to Instagram for you. And that is a job that did not exist even 15 years ago. And so it's kind of amazing to see how these things do get created in terms of new opportunities. But that requires a high degree of creativity to come up with it is. I think part of it is you can't have a fixed mindset, right? And you want to think about how can we really expand the horizons, right? Actually, let's talk about get really deep in the innards of like Wi-Fi or cellular networks. Something people are talking about is using AI to steer antennas in base stations, right, to improve signal quality. Right, now that's something a human was never going to do in the first place.
Absolutely.
Right, so that's great. That's a net gain for society. There's no deskilling, totally safe.
Yeah.
Right, and I think the challenge is, you do get these things where, yeah, it is an open question of, to pick your example, I did abstract math in university, and I had to calculate several matrix multiplications by hand for modest matrix sizes. I've calculated AES encryption before once.
By hand?
By hand, and then I let the computer do it from there on out.
I did that once too, yeah.
Yeah, and
Don't want to do it again.
Right, but I also don't work in cryptography. If I did, I would actually probably be far more conversant. And so I think it lets us, I think it really will pop us up the stack higher.
I think to a large extent, you look at the self-driving cars that exist today or the self-driving technologies that exist today. I mean, you could sit there and let these devices, drive your car or maintain your speed or maintain your distance between you and the guy in front of you or the person in front of you in their car, or you could not. I mean, to some extent, you can elect to utilize those tools or not. And if you're concerned about deskilling, let's say deskilling your driving skills, then maybe you're not as much interested in letting those things go on as you could. But what I was trying to say is that as any sort of technology advances, these sorts of things impact what people do. I mean, we're not sitting there, grooming horses or creating saddles and stuff. We're not doing that anymore because most of that's done only by craftspeople anymore. We don't have to ride horses to go from, Oakland to San Francisco or something anymore.
Right, but I think part of Peter's point is that what that means is once upon a time, right? I'm not a historian, so I don't know, but like you could imagine a hypothetical world where every middle-class person, say, had a horse. Right, and today, the only people the only people who have horses are it's a much more boutique and rare and expensive thing because it is less common, right? In the same way that, with the advent of, say, Twitter, you might say, oh, long-form commentary is on the decline or whatever.
I think that what we're getting at here is, let me call it the Axiom effect. Essentially, Wall-E. Remember all those people on the Axiom ship? And nobody could do anything anymore because the machines did everything for them. And so they were incapable even of standing. And I think that that's sort of the question is AI going to make us the passengers on the Axiom, or is AI just going to be another tool that liberates us? Because on the flip side, I can see both sides of this. Because on the flip side, you could say that almost any technology, especially any labor-saving technology, has eliminated skills from the world.
Yes.
And so, for example, I was reading a great thing about ancient wooden shipbuilding. No one on Earth knows how to make a wooden ship anymore. We simply lack those skills. They've gone. And yet, literally hundreds of thousands of people had those skills before. It just went away. And that's the nature of technology. And I think that the challenge that is being posed here is, if we allow automation to take things to a certain point, beyond a certain point, the skill disappears completely.
And the question you have to ask is, should those skills disappear or not? Is there a society benefit for having somebody understand how to build a wooden ship? Or, and now we're talking about IT operations kinds of skills, which are fairly high priced skills and high developed and takes a long time to get there. But in reality, it's the same concept. Technology is going to come. It's going to make that job easier. At some point, it's going to make that job considerably easier. And perhaps at some point, we need as an industry to think about how do you take the next step up that stack to try to come up with, some skills that aren't automatable at the moment.
It's the exceptions, though, I think, because we've used them everyone's probably done an automated phone system, and when the thing you actually want to do is, if you can follow the menu system, and it can do what you want it to, it's brilliant. But when you want to do something that isn't a menu option to, it's incredibly frustrating as a user to use, isn't it? Because the computer says no, or you speak to someone and all they can do is ask the questions out on the computer screen, and they're not allowed to. And they're so directed by a pre-programmed set of instructions. And I think when you talk about IT systems and managing them, for as I say, for 90% of the time, it's going to be perfect because it's going to do exactly what you expect. But it's that 10% of the time when something doesn't quite work as you expect, or there's some bug in some code, and we might just get to a point where it doesn't work, we can't fix it, computer says no, I don't know how to go beyond what the computer says, because all I do is follow what it says on the computer, and therefore I haven't got the skills to deal with it.
But there was a
that's going to
time.
have an effect.
There was a time when the average solutions engineer for a computer company, one of the first things you used to get when you went to work for HP was a soldering iron.
Yeah.
That was actually one of those things that would happen, and that doesn't happen anymore, and society hasn't collapsed.
No, it hasn't collapsed, so we throw things away now. We buy a new one, don't we? We don't fix things anymore. We just have to buy a new one because we don't have the skills to fix it.
Right, but I think one of the things that you brought up that I actually want to explore a little bit more is, machine learning is maybe a little bit unique in that it's a probabilistic solution.
Yeah.
Right, and I think one of the things you were talking about was autonomous vehicles, right? And so I think there's actually a policy question in here, which in this case is code for over my pay grade, but is nonetheless interesting, which is if you think about autonomous vehicles, like it's very clear that at some point we're going to get vehicles that are vastly safer than human drivers, right? And we would love that day to go, but we're also going to have this coexistence of vehicles that are driven by humans, right? Vehicles with older technology. And how can you use it initially in a way that is purely beneficial, right? So if you look at a lot of the ADAS applications, you have things like automatic lane keeping and like emergency braking, where you're taking aspects of autonomy, putting them into a standard car, and purely augmenting the human. Like I would love to have a car that will automatically brake when I'm not paying attention and prevent someone.
Today.
Right? No, they do.
Yeah.
I've got a 2011 Civic, so mine's not very smart. But I'd love to see more of those things being deployed. But that's a very incremental, and it's a way that augments human capability that I think is so potent, right? And I think that's part of the issue is, right, for ML, it has to be very good to trust it, because the way it fails will be utterly unlike a human, right? It's just going to do bonkers things that like a human would never, ever in a million years do.
Yeah, we were driving to across South Carolina, I guess, and a semi cut into the lane, and the semi happened to have a very high back end, and so the ultrasonic sensors on our car were very low. Yeah. So it did not detect. So we're going at 75 miles an hour. It was a 75 mile per hour zone, and this guy cuts in.
It's okay if you were speeding too.
No, I wouldn't go that far, but nonetheless, it cut in front of us, and the car did not react as it would normally do. It should start slowing down, and so we almost went right underneath this truck, but the wife was able to react quick enough to save us and all that. But yeah, there are, I'm not sure that's anecdotal, but there are challenges in all these technologies to get everything to work very, very well. And they can be approximate for a long time and still help us out and still do better. But to a large extent, I like to think of AI as somewhat augmenting our skills and adding capabilities that we can take advantage of because we don't have to do it anymore. It's not unlike any other technology that's ever existed in the past.
Yeah, and I want to actually follow on your anecdotal story, because I think that's actually a really good illustration of the challenges of some types of technology. Is that, and I think we have to absolutely see this with autonomous vehicles right now. And I believe, judging from what I hear from the security field day delegates and the networking field day delegates and so on, that we're seeing this in enterprise tech as well, and that is this strange situation where the machine learning is not yet 99% effective. Maybe it's not even 70% effective, but people are relying on it 100%. And you see this in autonomous vehicles. You see these fools with their videos on YouTube, and they're like fooling the Tesla into driving in a place that it really shouldn't, and in a situation that it really doesn't want to be driving. Or they're overly relying on lane keeping or automatic braking or whatever. You see this in security, where people say, my intrusion detection system is machine learning powered. It's got artificial intelligence in it. I'm just going to turn it on and walk away. In other words, people are relying 100% on a 70% system. And that, I think, is maybe the biggest risk of machine learning.
I mean, I think that's 100% an issue, right? Like if you look at, if you've ever used, machine translation, it's not the same as a human translator.
Yeah. As someone who actually translates as a hobby, that is absolutely true.
What languages do you translate?
Well, French and German, and I am using it as a way to learn.
Yeah.
Because essentially what I'm doing is I'm using machine learning to do the easy part so that I can focus on the interesting part, which is exactly, I think, what Peter would hope that people would be using machine learning for, right?
It is.
So that, I don't need to translate the words that I already know. I need to translate the ones I don't know. And so it helps me quickly separate out the ones I don't know so that I can focus on the ones that are interesting.
And that's the crux of this whole thing, because if you have AI or automation that can handle the more mundane aspects of some task, you can focus your efforts on the less mundane things. And I'm not sure that's going to de-skill you. It might de-skill you in the mundane tasks that you no longer have to do, but it'll upskill you with respect to what you're seeing, which the systems can't handle.
So I've just made a counter argument to your argument
in
that a real world case where it's actually upskilling.
I think it has the ability to upscale, and I think that's where we should be trying to use machine learning to upskill and to do the things which humans can do very well. I just have a feeling that, and maybe it's as I look more generally, particularly at the IT field and particularly at people running networks, I think there's been de-skilling going on for many years, and that worries me. The amount of times I get called in to troubleshoot
is a function of AI.
Well, no, I just think it could accelerate it. So I think it's happening anyway. So I go into customers and troubleshoot networks, and sometimes it's as simple as a chat box. But the people who are managing the networks don't actually know their own network or how it works. Because they rely too heavily on contracts they've got with the vendors. So something doesn't work, I've found a vendor. I don't even want to get involved in it. So I'm seeing that pattern anyway. And then you're talking about, well, actually, I'm going to put in a system which is going to do pretty much 90% of the management for you. It's just going to encourage that de-skilling. I need to know even less now. I can sit back and drink my coffee and learn even less. I don't need to know it. And that's my worry, is the fact that it's more going to encourage laziness, I guess, really, and people not wanting to educate themselves. Because then ultimately, why do we run systems? We run them so that users can do what they need to do. And you're going to get more poorly performing networks because the people don't really.
Okay, I have an actually very counter viewpoint on that one.
No, that's fine.
So, let me start with a counter example, actually. So I think one of the things, so let's talk about operating systems. Pretty old technology, pretty mature, right? We've got Linux, we've got Windows, we've got iOS.
Not so much anymore, but go ahead.
But one of the things that is fascinating is I actually think that today you have a more distributed set of people working on operating systems than you did at any point in time in the past. So Twitter, for example, employs people whose sole job is to tune Linux for Twitter's specific applications. Same is true with Google, and it's probably just Facebook, tens or hundreds of people.
All these guys.
Right, and so the interesting thing is, at a consumer level, it's true. Very few people, to a first order approximation, nobody plays with design of an OS. But in a business context, right, the fact that an OS is open source has actually opened up a lot more possibilities in some way, so that there is a broader opportunity. To be an OS developer, you don't have to work at a company like HP or Digital like you did in the 90s to do that. Now you have consumers, like ultimate end consumers, who are saying, no, I actually need to do this myself. I need to insource this in some sense because I don't really want or need a vendor to control this for me. And I think an interesting question is, to what extent will machine learning end up like that? Where you say, yeah, initially it's really hard, so I'm going to use a third-party vendor, but as it becomes a little bit more ordinary, a little bit less black magic, and a little bit easier to work with, maybe you'll see that there are actually many, many, many more companies that are tinkering with machine learning.
I think the challenge with machine learning today is that it's more of a black box and something that can be openly understood how it works and how it plays out, and where, yeah, you can tweak hyperparameters or something like that during training, but once it's trained, how it's actually performing its function is completely unknown. So I think I was trying to understand where you're going with that, David, because it didn't play out in my...
No. So what I'm saying is, like right now, if you look at the number of companies that are training models, right, it's relatively small. And the hope is that at some point in time in the future, it'll be much, much bigger. And it may be that what you see is actually even a small enterprise can tweak a machine learning model, right? Maybe retrain it, maybe fine tune it, right? So Andrew Ng, actually, he's very much pioneered this notion of data-centric AI. And one of his points was that actually with a very small amount of high quality data, you can do tremendous things. And so that's very intriguing because it might put some of these AI manipulation, as opposed to just usage. And I think that is to some extent what you're talking about, is that people are losing the ability to manipulate and change things, and they're sort of becoming, just a user and a consumer without any real ability to impact it.
I think there's sort of two sets of people. So I think there's your technology companies, which is like some of the people you've talked about. Yeah. And I think, especially the tech companies and a lot of, I know it's especially we're here in Silicon Valley, we've got a lot of those companies. I think they are definitely not going to get de-skilled or being de-skilled. They're skilling up all the time. But I think when you look at a IT team working for a council, so a consumer of technology, not a developer of technology, I think that's where the de-skilling is happening. And so I think almost the gap's becoming bigger between that sort of end user of technology and the people developing the technology. Right. I think that's been happening for a while. But I wonder if machine learning will accelerate that even more, because you said, yes, we're all the people tinkering with the machine learning algorithms and doing all that development, they're definitely gaining more skills. But then the end product of that, and the people who are just using the products, are actually understanding they're buying equipment which they don't understand at all. They're just putting it in and hoping it'll all manage and look after itself.
And so I want to actually ask you all then, I'm going to put the question to you. We've had this conversation. I feel like we're not maybe getting too far, because strangely, this is pretty unusual for the on-premise IT roundtable. We're not all in agreement here. And I think that we're all still pretty much maybe where we started even. And so let me ask you, Ray, I'm going to ask you first. Are we back where we started? Is IT going to de-skill because of machine learning?
I think the proper question really, will skills have to change? And I think the answer is yes. De-skilling, upskilling, it's happening all the time with technology. And it's just that AI is just more quickly, more faster, more rapidly making these sorts of transitions. But in order to survive in today's world, you have to embrace change. And skill change is going to be part of every person's lifestyle from now on.
David?
Yeah, I think I'm sort of strongly with Ray on this one. Once upon a time, 100% of people washed their dishes by hand. I only occasionally wash dishes by hand, usually the things that don't fit. And I think you are going to see some skills erode. I think it'll be very slow though, right? To be honest, in enterprise IT, it seems like getting humans out of the loop entirely is unlikely to happen, and probably should not happen for a long time.
Peter?
Well, I still wash my dishes by hand.
Oh.
So I'm one of those type of people because, I don't like, dishwashers don't always do a good job of things. But my children can wash dishes very well. They always leave marks on it because they're so used to putting it in the dishwasher. So there we go. I think, I think there's I think it is de-skilling people. Now, is that a good thing or not? That's a different question. And you could say that there's actually, as all technology de-skills people, because we can then learn other skills. My worry, particularly in IT operations, is we'll get to a point where there'll be, we'll have to change our approach to things because there'll be certain issues that 2-3% that machines can detect that potentially nobody will be able to fix. So then what do? Do we just, a bit like we talked about with a soldering iron, well, we just rip the entire system out and put a new one in and hope it works better because we got to a point where we don't know how to fix it. Well, I think that there's a danger that could happen.
Yeah, and I'll actually follow on that. I don't want to throw too much of a curveball in here. I don't think it's machine learning that's going to de-skill enterprise IT. I think it's Kubernetes. Because already the way that most next generation applications are being deployed is in a hyper-orchestrated, hyper-automated fashion. And the solution is blow it away and rebuild it. Fresh.
And people do that today.
And it's automated, and essentially, not only is it automated, it's meta-automated, because essentially Kubernetes detects what's going wrong, blows it away, rebuilds it, and deploys it again. And that's how today's modern applications work. So again, I don't want to throw too much of a curveball at the panel, but I do think that enterprise IT is being de-skilled, but I'm not going to blame machine learning.
No, and it's not just machine, it's just machine learning. I just a quick example of that. I recently got involved in there's a project to, we got asked to basically go in and look at putting a new wireless network in. And this helped because their current network wasn't they said it wasn't fit for purpose. They basically had one checkbox selected wrong, but their solution was to rip out the entire network and replace it with new equipment because they said their equipment was old and not fit for purpose. Whereas actually all they did was they had a bandwidth limiting option, so nobody could get any throughput on it.
So what they really should have done is...
But they couldn't fix it because they didn't have the skill set to fix it. Yeah. So they did actually rip out the entire network and replace it. Or a checkbox.
It's just easier to do that in software.
And sometimes it's easier to, and it's easier to do that in software. So that might be where we're going.
Well, thank you very much for joining us for this conversation. I really appreciate the diverse viewpoints and the deep knowledge that you have about machine learning and enterprise tech. Before we go, though, where can we connect with you and follow your thoughts on this and continue the conversation? Peter?
Yeah, one place is on Twitter, so I'm at Mackenzie Wi-Fi, or you can also look up mackenziewifi.com, which is my website.
Twitter is probably the best way to connect with me, the Kanter, Kanter, or david@mlcommons.org.
And for me, it's my Twitter ID is Ray Lucchesi, Lucchesi, and I'm also a blogger on rayonstorage.com. And a lot of my AI discussions are happening in the blog these days.
And as for me, I'm Stephen Foskett. You can find me at sfoskett on most social media networks. And of course, you can find me at Tech Field Day and Gestalt IT. So thanks for listening to the On-Premise IT Roundtable podcast. If you enjoyed this discussion, please do subscribe and give us a rating in your favorite podcast application, since that does help us, and do share it with your friends. This podcast is brought to you by GestaltIT.com, your home for IT coverage from across the enterprise. For show notes and more episodes, go to GestaltIT.com/podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.